Hello and welcome to the Crux of Medtech. We go beyond the buzzwords, bringing you the insights from the innovators, investors, and leaders who are driving this life-saving space forward. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by the stories that people have to tell in medtech. As someone who works in this sector on a daily basis, I come across so many interesting people and so many interesting stories that I think the world deserves to know about. Welcome to the Crux of Medtech. Awesome. So welcome guys to this episode of the podcast.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for TTP for hosting us in this wonderful office area. So I think it would only be fair for you to kick off, Paul, and tell us a bit about who you are and what it is that you do here.
Sure. I'm Paul Galluzzo, and I am involved with TTP's commercial activities, technical activities, a bit of legal, a little bit of biomedical, and so I get involved across a wide range of TTP's business management.
Very nice. And where's your involvement with the medtech side?
It's particularly tech. So if there's understanding what tech to make, making the tech, manufacturing the tech, it's high-tech medical. It's really where I specialize. Once spoke to a head of R&D at Olympus, and he said the value of a company like TTP is not where it's commodity, because it's quite hard to get a return on investment. He said it's where you've got a high-tech edge, because it's harder to find, it's more valuable, and the return on investment is higher. If we can attach an ultrasound imaging system into our stapler, then we make more money, it's more differentiated, and it's harder to get. So that's where I am, that's my space.
Very good. And where's the competency of TTP?
So our deepest competencies are certainly in surgical, and also in imaging systems, neurotechnology. We also have a significant drug delivery aspect, eye care, and implantables, smart implantables, for example, continuous glucose monitoring or smart orthopedic implants. So those are typically our deepest competencies.
Great. And then Steve, tell us about who you are.
Medtech industry for 35 years, did a lot with surgical robotics. I do now a lot helping people with surgical robotics, AI, and trying to help startups as much as I can.
Amazing. And what was your career up till then? Where were you? What did you do?
I spent 16 years at J&J. Then I did multiple California startups, and then I did some work in orthopedics. Then I spent 6 years at a surgical robotics company called CMR Surgical. And then for the last year or so, I've just been trying to help the industry and the community to do as well as we can in medical devices.
Perfect. So we're going to dive straight into some topics here. So the first one is really from the prep that we did on this is like, we're going to start with soft tissue surgical robotics, but both of you know a lot about that. So I'm going to go to a comment that you said, Steve. Surgeons want beyond Da Vinci. So what's driving the shift, and what are surgeons really looking for at the moment?
So I think that most surgeons know Da Vinci, so they know the capabilities. And what I think they're not really looking for is something that's subpar to Da Vinci. So let's start with what they're not looking for. They're not looking for something that's not as capable as a Da Vinci. But then if you've got something the same as a Da Vinci, get a Da Vinci. So I think where surgeons are looking for is either peripheral technologies, so things that are slightly different to a Da Vinci, so not another laparoscopic robot, or a very different form factor, which allows them to either do a different workflow, something like a Moon Surgical, which is more of a laparoscopic workflow, or something like a modular system, which is more like an SSI or a Hugo or a CMR Surgical Versius. I think that they're looking for something that's different than an intuitive. But I think the interesting thing for a lot of the clinicians out there is what's next and beyond intuitive.
Indeed. And so, Paul, from where you're seeing things, you're looking at all of the future technologies, what's coming down the pipeline. So where do you think some of those impact areas are going to be? What technologies are we going to see that might actually fulfill what surgeons might want from Steve's perspective?
From a laparoscopic perspective, there's still a lot of chasm to cross. So certainly you get endo-wrists, give you dexterity, give you the ability to do more things. But you do lose the feel for what you've got. You can imagine having a better understanding with a sensor that could detect where a critical structure is, say, like a nerve, or is there a ureter nearby, or have I got all the cancer? We were just talking about that a minute ago. So the cancer margin detection is a clear opportunity for a new phase of laparoscopic surgical robotics.
Okay. And what are surgeons asking for more specifically than different than Da Vinci?
So it varies depending on the specialty that you talk to. But one of the things that they're all wanting is to see well beyond the human eye. Okay, they want to be able to see things that you can't normally see with either current laparoscopic. So near-infrared imaging like ICG is something that they want, and they want that in white light formats. So they don't want to see in black and white with a green sort of halo on it. They want to see what they see. They want to see. Paul mentioned it. Surgeons are very concerned about damaging structures they shouldn't damage. Nerves being a very big one. If you look at things like prostatectomy, if you end up damaging nerves, you end up with erectile dysfunction. So it's not just about surviving the operation. You want to survive operations with quality of life. You don't want to reduce quality of life. So surgeons are wanting things that will give them assistance to try and not damage nerves, not hit blood vessels, make sure that if they transect the bowel, it's viable. If you want to put the bowel back together after they've put it back together, it's viable and there's no leaks. These are the sort of things that they want to know, and they want technologies to be assistive and to help them so that perioperatively, they have more surety that they're not damaging stuff.
Okay. So that's similar to what you're saying, Paul?
I mean, you talk about anastomosing a colon successfully. Of course, it has to be said that the dream is not to have to do that in the first place. Yeah. So to do something less invasive, to do something endoluminally, let's say you could do an endoscopic submucosal dissection. So you just go in non-invasively, you pull out the cancer, or maybe a full thickness resection is more ambitious, but you then have much less trauma to the patient, much faster recovery time. There's no colostomy questions. Yeah. There's no question of anastoma. Well, there's a question of leakage, to be fair. But it's a much less invasive. That would be an awfully bigger. Yeah, for sure. A colon surgeon, they look at you as a patient. They say, I never want to see you again. I'm going to damn well make sure it's closed. Yeah. And if you had a patient perspective, they say, my God, that was invasive and traumatic, and now I have a quality of life impairment and so on. So yes, for sure, making that job better, there's a world to accomplish.
I think that you talk something very important there, which is we understand as a community that if you do that minimally invasive through the endoluminal, and you take an ESD or you take a full thickness resection, and everyone always asks me, well, why don't they do it today? And I think that this is what we can talk a little bit about today, which is there's technological barriers and there's difficulties from a surgical skill set with the tools they have today. So what do the future tool sets look like, I think is probably what is quite interesting.
Cool. So throw it back to you. What are those future tool sets?
I think this is where, again, robotics, we've really thought of it in the paradigm of intuitive, in the Da Vinci. Okay, when you say surgical robot, 90% of the world thinks of the intuitive XI. That's what they think of. But I think beyond that, there are ways that you can apply that to endoscopy, and now bring robotics to endoscopy to give enhanced tools to endoscopy. Today, the problem is you put an endoscope in and you kind of come out parallel, and you can kind of sort of, if you're a skilled endoscopist, moving your things, you can move it around. People want to be able to do true surgery within the bowel, and to do that you need traction, counter-traction, triangulation, and vision. These are some of the things that you need. And really it's about, can you do robotics over a long distance and apply that so that you can give that sensation of the XI, so the movement, the triangulation, and the wristing and all those kind of things, but via the delivery mechanism of an endoluminal endoscopic system. That's wise.
You do realize you've teed up the ultimate nemesis to the engineer.
Yes.
You just said, I want Da Vinci at the cecum.
Yes.
You do realize you said that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, just checking.
Yeah. So as an engineer, Paul, how far away are we from that kind of technology coming?
So if you'd asked me the question, you'd ask Steve. Steve's more knowledgeable than me, but I would have given you a different answer. And I'd posit that it's still valid.
Yeah.
So if we break it down, you're saying traction, counter-traction, triangulation, all that.
Yeah.
I do understand. And I think oftentimes it's coined as how far into the colon can we do Da Vinci? Yes. How far can we do bimanual suturing?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
And actually, if you look at an endoscopist, they'll say like, oh, I wouldn't even dream of that. I'm used to tying my shoelaces with one hand outstretched. That's all I'm used to. Give me two hands. Oh my God, two working channels. That's a miracle. So, all right, surgeons, endoscopists, very, very contrasting expectations. What do you need in order to intervene in the colon? You need access. You've got to get there. Well, if you've got a Da Vinci loaded on the end of a gigantic endoscope, it's going to be pretty hard. But okay, access. You've got to get there.
Yep.
You've got to be stable.
Yeah.
And that's where the people like, well, let's not name names, rigidization technologies are a bit of a rage right now. And they open up a really interesting frontier in stabilizing. Now I can do new things. Just if a good rigidization technology on an endoscope, now it's solid, or I hold tight with balloons. That's something you've got experience with. And now I've got there, I'm stable, and now I need to be able to intervene. And maybe that's traction, counter-traction, triangulation. Or maybe at that point, if you're sufficiently stable, you can delight the endoscopist and start to merge endoscopy and surgery into one discipline and start to say, actually, there's something which has got 2 degrees of freedom. There's something which has got 6 degrees of freedom. It's not bimanual suturing. It's something which is able to go there, hold, and be reasonably rigid while something else is pulling it. Or something like that, and which degrees of freedom. Now that's where the engineers are challenged. It's breaking it down more like that and saying, well, which degrees of freedom? How expensive is that? How much can we package it? And how do you clean it? Is it single use? How much of it is single use? You can't drape an endoscope. I mean, you can, but it's ugly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my answer to your question.
Okay, cool. So, moving the question on from that, where do you see as some of the blue ocean areas within surgical robotics where obviously soft tissue's been around for a long time, all three of us know that and have experience with that, but where do you see as the opportunity areas for surgical robots to go where they aren't currently? And start with you, Steve.
So I think we have to reframe it. Surgical robots is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, a lot of things we have is therapeutic robots rather than surgical robots, and I think maybe as an industry we need to rebrand that trademark.
So how would you split the two?
So if you think about something like a cardiac robot, okay, Capstan Medical, great example. Is that doing surgery or is that doing an interventional procedure? So is it a surgical robot or is it an interventional robot? And I think it's it does what surgery would do, but it's not a surgical robot. So when I think of this, I struggle because I often say I deal with surgical robots and soft tissue particularly. I think we have to be a little bit wider. I think neurovascular robots, endovascular robots, endoluminal robots, endourological, the endobronchial robots are very interesting with Ion and Monarch. I think that whole area and Galaxy won't leave them off. I think there's a lot of applications that can happen in what are more softer tissues. But then there's a huge amount that can also happen in the hard tissues, spine robots, joint robots, dental robots, neuro robots. I think as we start getting more and more technological advances, so the robot in itself is already advancing, and some of the, and you can probably talk a lot better than me about the advances that's happening in the components and the different sensors and things that are coming along. But that's happening in combination with the massive advances in software and AI. And I think we're starting to see a convergence of all these things come together that allow, I mean, the shape locking of endoscopes has been around since 2006. I mean, there was NeoGuide, there was Shape Lock, there's lots of them. But I think they were ahead of their time for the adjuncts.
I think the cost engineered ones are still coming.
Exactly. So I think you might be able to talk about that. I mean, you talked about it a minute ago, and I think it's important. I think technologically we can probably do anything, right? If you put enough money behind it and you put enough engineers and you can make anything for $1 million. But that's not a product, right?
I'm interrupting this episode to bring you a word from our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical technology development with deep scientific and engineering expertise. They support ambitious medtech companies in solving high-risk, high-complexity challenges where there's no margin for error. Whether you're tackling uncharted technical territory or racing to bring a product to market, TTP provide clarity and direction. By de-risking innovation and ensuring seamless alignment with regulatory and manufacturing demands, TTP help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
So,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I thought you meant for a development fee of
no,
$1 million.
no,
You can make anything.
I could make $1 million robotic endoscope, right? Endoscopic endoscope.
Yeah.
Each one is $1 million each, and I'm sure it'll do.
Yeah,
but that's not a product.
It's not a product. No. Can I talk about something that I'm not qualified to talk about?
Yeah, please
it's your stuff. But so you talked about endourological robots. I just think it's a rubbish value proposition. I know there's people watch. I apologize that I'm insulting your baby is ugly. But like the value proposition of going in and out to the liver, just get a better bloody laser. Just dust the thing and then hoover it out. And you don't even need a robot. It's such a stupid value. Sorry, that is not the future.
For the urological?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I think, but what you said before is interesting, which is when you're going to go and take that laser to the stone, one of the problems they have today, for example, is that they don't have the precision, stability, and guidance of the laser. So it's a little bit hit and miss. And I think the biggest thing that this solves is actually not for the experts. I think we always have to remember that there's a 10% of people are hyper capable, and with 2 knitting needles and whatever, and a pair of shoelaces, they can do a procedure.
Yeah. Bubblegum.
But that's not the average clinician.
That's fair.
The problem is that we have this sort of bell curve with a long tail where all these problems happen down here, or all the challenges or the cases that go on forever is because the clinician is not quite skilled enough or not capable enough to do it. Or too bored. And
I mean, seriously.
Yeah, I know. I agree. But what can happen is I think technology can get that tail pushed up, and that's where we should care about in healthcare.
Yeah.
So when you say, you just do this or do that, I think for a skilled clinician, yes. But for the average clinician, I'm sure there's no average clinicians in the world. But if there was in the world an average clinician, then can technology and robotics and different softwares help them to be as good as the best clinicians? That's my paradigm.
There you go. Yeah, so we always, the thing we always hear, is it okay if I don't answer a question?
No,
I'll just say
go
something.
for it.
Is that all right?
I'll encourage it.
So the thing we always hear from clinicians is, well, I'm an expert clinician, so I know what I'm doing, but I do know some schmucks, and they benefit from the thing you're talking about. It's like, so you're sort of decoding that the whole time.
Yeah.
And what we seem to observe is that robotics today brings people up to the level of an actual. I think you're using average to say rubbish, and I'm using average to say 50th percentile.
Yeah. Okay.
So surgical robotics does not take the place of the most skilled VAT surgeon.
No.
But it does. I don't know. I'm just the tech guy. But anyway, it seems like it brings you up to 50th percentile, maybe 60th percentile. But it doesn't really push the boat out. And it feels like that's back on laparoscopic, back on back on laparoscopic.
Yeah.
It feels like we're converged at, great. We don't have any terrible failures because you've got this tool that makes everything easier. But actually, it is kind of average.
It is, and I think part of that is because we often conflate two things, and we think that it's all about hand-eye coordination that makes skill in a surgeon. That's 50% of it. 50% of it is good clinical judgment, when not to operate, what to do when you get into a complex situation. And I think that that's where AI and the data ecosystem, the phone a friend system, all these things, I think that's where we also then do increase. So we get them from a hand-eye coordination technical skill through the robot, which is the physicality of it. But from the mental side of it and the mental support and the thinking about the procedure holistically, I think we can use AI and data with the robots to then take them to the next level.
I think have to. It's a major prong of the value proposition of a robot is building up that data set and comorbidities, surgical planning assists, all that. Here's a question for you. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Please,
okay?
please.
Depends how difficult it is.
So I often hear surgical robotics companies go into two modes, one of which is the future is this, we're just going to be futuristic, and the other of which is today's surgeons are operating like this with laparoscopic controls, and we're going to tailor to that paradigm, and we're going to tailor. So, I don't want to be ageist, but the 60-year-old surgeon, this maybe 65-year-old surgeon can still do it, not the video gaming 25-year-old, 30-year-old. I have an opinion. Which do you think is the right place to tailor to?
For me personally, I think I come from the old school where you look at the residents in training, you look at the young clinicians coming through because they're the future right now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the problem is, 35 years ago when I started this, if you looked at the training regime of, let's take surgeons again, but it's all clinicians, the amount of time that they had in residency, in training was massive. And the amount of exposure they got to difficult cases was massive. The way that the clinical education training has just basically been compressed as well, because we need more people in the workforce faster. I think their capabilities to get to proficiency in some of the older techniques is just difficult. So we have to use technology for several things. One is to give them the hand-eye coordination. One is to give them assistive AI so that they make better decision making. And then the other part of it, which is the big piece that a lot of my colleagues will kill me if I don't talk about it, is getting them to proficiency through better training. And how do we use technology in training? And I think again with robots and robotics, it's been a landslide shift in the way that we train people, because you have to kind of train them for the robot, and therefore there's better technology for training come out through that. So I think it's the younger.
Okay, eye tracking, gimmick or valuable?
Good eye tracking that works well to augment helps. Bad eye tracking that becomes distraction.
Oh, that's a politician's answer.
Of course it is, but again, I've used eye tracking technology that's been useful.
You have, yeah.
Yeah. And I found it good. And you have to ask, do you want instrument tracking or eye tracking? And is my eye lying of where I actually want to go? That's one of the other things. So you need smart eye tracking. Eye tracking where it literally just follows where you're looking, and you're concentrated here and you glance across and the whole camera shifts across is really distracting.
Yeah, interesting. Closed or open console?
So I'm a fan.
Oh, no, not better or worse, pros and cons.
Yeah, okay, pros and cons. Closed console gives you an immersion, so therefore you have lack of distraction and you are immersed into it, and you get a real sense of the depth, and you can bring the entire operating room into the console. So all your controls and everything can be as if you've got immersed in the operating room. The problem with it is that a lot of complex surgery is a dance between the bedside team and the surgeon. And if you have to take your head out to look across and see what's happening, I think that breaks the workflow. Whereas if you have an open console, you can directly see and have a much better 360 awareness of what's going on.
And countries, it differs by country, doesn't it?
Yep.
If you have a more hierarchical society, you have a more, I want to command and control my OR.
Yep.
Or a more collaborative society is, or more quiet. It's frankly a less verbose society. You want to be more immersed. And also I just find, and again, I'm just a tech guy, just design it, what do I know? But it seems like with a closed console, you can go further. Hey, I get it. There are people with investments here, and I'm not saying they're wrong because I don't know. But with a closed console, you can master it further and further and further. It just seems like you go you don't.
Well, I would say that it depends on specialty and it depends on the user. Okay. So if I'm a very skilled laparoscopic user that's done 30 years of just looking at flat screens in 2 dimensions, and you give me a 3D screen, I can go pretty far with that, whether it's immersive or non-immersive. They've got the skill abilities. You also have to look at, we get very biased by the urological side of things. And remember, they didn't go through laparoscopy generally. Some of them did, not many. So they went from open to immersive. So they feel very comfortable in that world. When you've been, a general surgeon that's done a lot of laparoscopy with open systems, a lot of them really feel uncomfortable going in. So I think it's horses for courses. And again, if I was designing a system today, I would give both options.
Yes, both.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought you might say that.
What are the technological barriers to giving both options?
You need a bigger budget. You need more money. They're different. There's a lot of cost in taking open console. There's a lot of aesthetics and ergonomics that have to be designed and paid for, and even just the capital cost of each of them is quite high. You have to set up a production line for each of them. It's money.
Inventory or
absolutely
the whole 9 yards. Usability.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
software,
Oh, yeah.
everything, the whole running. But for me, I think that the market's going to pan out into different user preferences. And the worst thing that I see from a commercial side is when you're trying to put a round peg into a square hole. So you got somebody who really, really doesn't like the open console, and you're saying to them, yeah, but you have to have the open console. I think that you risk alienating.
Yeah.
So again, I think optionality and choice. SS Innovations have actually done it. You know, they've got the VR headset version and they've got the open console version.
They did absolutely everything, didn't they? Isn't that the company that did like
They've
every
done so
single?
much, yeah.
Yeah.
But and that's probably because they've listened to their customers, right? And they actually, you know, it wasn't driven by pure internal think. Some people said, I want immersive, so they gave the VR headset style. And some people said, I want open console. Some people said, I like the free floating.
Yeah.
Others said, I really need to feel a haptic arm to be able to feel comfortable. So they've given optionality there. And I think, again, people will choose different systems based on whether it's open or closed. People will choose different systems on whether it's got free floating haptics or haptic arms. I think there'll be people who like modular, people who like booms, people who like bed mounted. I think the one good thing is that if we'd have had this conversation 15 years ago, it would be quite a boring conversation because we'd talk about one paradigm.
Yeah.
At least today we can talk about multiple approaches and architectures and optionality that people have.
Sure. So I think the whole soft tissue conversation I think we've done with now. So we wanted to bring it on to build to buy, because I know this is a topic that both of you are thinking about at the moment. So I want to first start with actually phrasing what is a build to buy.
There are variations on a theme, but basically, imagine you're a startup company. You're creating you're not a build to buy. Oh, I keep answering the negative, but anyway, it's like, what do you like? Well, I'll tell you what I hate.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you start up company, you're making your thing, you're designing it with the exit in mind, but you're not really attached to a Boston Scientific or to a Medtronic or whatever. And you're designing your thing and you built it and now you're trying to exit or sell product. If you're the Boston Scientific Medtronic striker, you're looking in at that, you are seeing something that they made the decisions on. Their venture capital investors are looking for 10 times multiple on that. That you put money in, you want 10 times your money out. They might not get it, you might negotiate or whatever. And the upside to you is you've got a war chest of balance sheet dollars to spend. You didn't have to pay for it through P&L, and so your 8% of turnover was preserved for sustaining engineering. It's all okay, the numbers stack up. But the problem is you still have to pay a lot of money for that. The investors want 10 times their money back, and it wasn't designed with you in mind. And so the benefit of a build to buy is you set up a development company, you get an investor to pay for it, and it then reaches a milestone. A clean milestone, typically triggering a buy, is of 510K, and the 510K triggers a buyout, and that might be at a 3 times multiple, it might be at whatever, it doesn't matter the multiple, but a multiple of what was invested in, you pay. And it was developed with you on a steering committee saying, I want to buy this, I will be buying this. When you hit your milestone, I will buy it, I'm compelled to buy it. And I want it like this. It needs to work with my other thing. It needs to be tailored to that. It needs to have an open console. We care about open consoles. And it's my thing. So you've got a better product for what you want. You've got a better price, and you've still leveraged your balance sheet dollars. You're still not taking out P&L.
So this is when a big strategic decides that they want to get into, say, robotics. They will go, right, we're going to send one R&D person, just as an example, one R&D person and fund it until it is an acquisition. Is that effectively what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you reach a point where you decide that now's the right time to do it? What's the pros, what's the cons of doing a build to buy?
Well, the pros are that you have... interesting. I just talked about having something tailor-made for you, and I talked about something which is affordable because it's not acquiring a venture capital-based startup. Actually, frankly, the major benefit is time to market. Compared to an organic R&D route, let's say it takes 4 or 5 years to get, it depends on the product, but a long time period. I can tell you 2 companies right now are doing the same project. I can't say who they are. I can't say what the project is. One of them is a build to buy. One of them is not. On the non-build to buy, they've just fired their 16 R&D engineers who are doing the project. And it's tragic because they're good people. But the other one is a build to buy, and the private equity is investing in it, and they're pushing like hell to get it over the line. And they're complaining by 510Ks 4 months late, and they're pushing like hell 4 months late. They're going to get there. They're going to get there. They're going to get acquired. It's night and day. That time to market. The head of that private equity called me up and said, look, I'm facing a little supply chain issue here. Within 1 week, if that company doesn't supply this thing, I will switch to a Chinese company. I was like, that's pushing. That there is pushing to get deals done, and that's healthy. The other thing is also compared to, here's another thing. We talk about time to market. You want to talk about acquire. I keep talking about my cup like an acquisition. So we acquire the cup. Now, Steve did it independently as a startup company. I acquire Steve's cup. Remediation is is a nightmare. And you did it under your quality system. I have my quality system. Yeah. It doesn't comply.
Exactly.
And that then puts me into a year, 2 years of remediation nightmares.
Paperwork nightmare.
Absolutely. And due diligence on that is difficult. Everything is difficult. So it's got a lot of benefits in time to market, remediation. You're still leveraging a balance sheet. It's tailored to what you need. It's a good option. It's not free. It has its costs. You know, you have to pay the investor back for the risk that they've taken.
Sure.
You have to recognize that, but it's a fast path to market.
Cool. So some good benefits there, but why would one fail? When would one go wrong?
I'd say the biggest point of failure in a build to buy is the fact that they have all this attraction. Everybody is keen on the idea of somebody else paying. Everybody likes the idea of getting to market faster, and they fail before they start by everybody talking about them, and not doing them. That's my personal opinion. It's not that the model breaks down. It's because actually, I thought that an investor of a build-to-buy model would have a portfolio approach, and they don't. They say every single one of these will succeed. It's like, oh my God, you don't let. It's like, okay, we've got 10. We'll let one go at a year because it's a bit of a dog. No, every single one must succeed. It's not. They succeed, and it's that they are difficult to wrap your head around. They are a big take a plunge. You have to commit. You have to commit a 3 times that cost. It might be $100 million buyout, might be 150, 200, might be $1 billion buyout. And you have to commit now to something that you're putting your company's money on the line in 4 years. And how many stakeholders do you have to line up to do that? Whereas an R&D project, the head of R&D says, I want this, I'm going to do this. The VP of R&D says it and it happens. So it's just a bit bigger. Decision-making at the beginning is the nemesis of the build-to-buy relationship, I think. That's my opinion.
I think there's other things that can happen that can be a problem as well. Mm-hmm. And one of them is that as an organization, you say, well, we'll do the build-to-buy as a plan B. Mm-hmm. That's the thing.
No, it's not a plan B.
You can't have it as the plan B.
Yeah.
And I've seen that myself a couple of times where, let's let our engineers do that. And then you'll have to dip in and out of the resources for our engineers now and again. We'll sort of do some shared stuff. And they'll send you the protocols. And
it's a commitment.
It's a commitment. You kind of, I kind of call it like you sometimes got to burn your boats when you go into this. And you've got to let the people who, I talk about this a lot, which is, why would you even think about it? Why don't we just let our R&D company, our R&D division do it? Because you have two different beasts. Mm-hmm. The strategics are brilliant at the commercialization and the scaling and the ability to do the marketing and the whole 9 yards. They're very good at iterative R&D within, which is making a stapler longer or a catheter smaller or things. Sure. They're very, very good at that, and and reducing cost out of it and all of that. They generally get hamstrung a little bit in doing what I would call the true, genuine innovation and rapid innovation. And some of that is because of the systems and mechanisms within the company that become, constraints, where the way that they have to do their meetings or get the approvals to move on to every single stage. If the executive's not there for 6 months, not available for a meeting, you've got a 6-month delay. Whereas when you're in a truly focused R&D company that's outside of the company, that lives within the rules, say the QMS or the DMS or whatever, that's aligned. So the documents have the same titles and things, that's great. But you're not in the bureaucracy of the day-to-day running, because you're not having to worry about the other businesses, and you're not having to be competing internally all the time. You're out in kind of your bubble and doing how a startup works. I think that's why you get a real big piece of why you get the speed. It's the focus, it's the lack of bureaucracy, it's the ability to make decisions, it's to do things in ways that in classic R&D inside the big companies they don't do. And
it's isolation.
It's isolation, yeah. It's the isolation, and it's also the sole focus. You're not distracted by the other things in the business. You don't have your engineers suddenly pulled off to go and fix something else in the business that's not working so well. So I think that for me, let each of the organizations focus on what they're best at. And I think that the strategics are brilliant at, they take the baby. That's another thing we can fail, is that handover. How and when you do the handover. Do you hand it over at a 510K, or do you hand it over when there's commercial traction? Difficult question. But at the right time, each organization plays to its strength. And I think that's the big win that you get with a build to buy.
Are there any famous build to buys that you can point to?
There's some huge ones that I know about that I don't know if are public. No, sorry.
Is it quite a modern concept then, this build to buy? Is this quite recent that companies have shown interest in this?
It started. It's newish to medtech. Over the last 15 years, it's been coming in. It's more established in pharma, but in medtech, and there's different flavors. So it's quite a famous example in Medtronic diabetes. Blackstone put a huge huge tranche into Medtronic. That's the Blackstone model. It's fairly unique to that situation where they famously are a financial investor and they're bankrolling the R&D there. But there's some more like what we're talking about here is, a project becomes a company and then comes back in. That's not the Blackstone model, and there's quite a few of those happening.
I think there's been a lot of what you could point to and think it was that, but it's not been structured. I think what you're right is that in the last 15 years, it's becoming more of a structured way of doing it, which I think is the difference. There's lots of examples of where, development corporations within companies have funded things knowing that they want to take it in later. But I think it's been more of an ad hoc, and it's sort of looked like a build to buy, or it sort of smells like a build to buy, but it's not quite really a build to buy. I think what's happening now is other industries have shown that it works well. And I think the medtech is now catching up a little bit and saying, actually, it's probably not a bad way to do it. And I think part of the reason for that is that we've had some catastrophic disasters within our industry where internal R&D projects have sucked and consumed vast amounts of money and not produced what they wanted it to produce, or it's produced it 5 years too late and the market's moved on. I think there's also been disasters from the other side, which has been some brilliant startups that the technology should never have died, but they couldn't exit. So therefore you've had brilliant technology that didn't have a home that it could go to, a natural home it could go to. And that's been a problem. So I think this solves, not for every project, but for a lot of projects, I think it solves for the strategics, the innovators, and the finance companies. I think this solves a lot of problems for them.
Absolutely. And so we talked a little bit about commercial there, but how early should commercial teams get involved with R&D projects, and how early should they be actually? And Steve, I'm going to pass this on to you.
Yeah, I have maybe a slightly weird opinion on this, but for me, it's from day one. You need commercial opinion. Doesn't mean you have to hire commercial people. But for me, I kind of preach this a little bit, which is you can't do R&D in isolation of what the market is able to and willing to pay. You have to have some kind of sandbox to understand. I've seen way too many projects where R&D teams have not been sort of helped enough to understand the confines of what it can be. We have to understand that this is not a consumer market where the consumer can decide to pay whatever they want to pay. Most healthcare systems around the world are, very strictly structured in payment systems, reimbursement, insurance, state pay, coding, coding and coverage it's fairly defined. And you can't just have a project that says, well, we'll work out the payments later, And the other problem with that is, and again, I'm talking out of my comfort zone here, is that I've watched lots of projects get lots of creep in them, where feature creep becomes a problem because they're not saying, you've got to be able to make this for $10. Okay. And a marketing person comes in and says, if we could just have it do this as well, and if it could just also make this noise, and if it could also have a little camera on it.
Can I have a remote control that I can wheel my robot around the hospital?
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Another quick interruption to tell you about our sponsors, KUKA. KUKA is a global leader in robotics with over 25 years of experience partnering with medtech companies on their journey to market. Their reputation is built on robust technology, reliability, and long-term collaboration. More than a supplier, KUKA provides trusted support throughout the product lifecycle, from development to integration and beyond. For companies exploring robotic solutions, the KUKA LBR Med offers a ready-to-integrate, state-of-the-art option that meets the highest medical standards, without the need to build from scratch. If you want to find out more, then head to the show notes and follow the link to KUKA's website.
Yes, so you end up with this creep coming in, and then what happens is that the product that you end up with coming out of the other end is either a little bit of a mess sometimes, but even if it's not a mess, it's not a commercially viable project. So I think you need the commercial team who's going to physically have to sell this thing or would give advice on how you sell it, come in right at the beginning and say, let me help you to understand as a team, when I go out to sell this, the challenges I'm going to have and the constraints that I'm going to have to sell within, and how we're going to have to do education, and how I'm going to have to demo this thing, and how I'm going to have to do this. Doesn't mean that changes totally the way the engineers, but at least they've got an awareness of it. And engineers are smart people, and they'll say, okay, so you need it so you can train it, so you need to carry it in a box.
Yeah. Pelly case. It's got to go to pelly case.
Yeah. So that sets part of the sandbox better for the engineers to understand.
Yeah. The airplane's going to go down to that temperature.
Yeah.
Do you know, my only take on what you're saying is, as an engineer, I feel it's my duty to be doing everything you said. And if I, as an engineer, wasn't doing the thing that you said your commercial team should be doing, I would feel I have failed.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a disciplined, good, effective R&D team must be doing, call it human factors if you want, but an engineer.
But I think that's, and again, companies like TTP, that's why I think you guys are more successful in getting these projects done and having the right products come out at the end, because you have a different mentality than happens in a strategic. There is so much vertical boundaries within. How dare an engineer go out and talk to my customers if I'm a head of sales?
Oh my God.
That would be, I talk to the customer, not them.
God.
And I've been involved in many situations where, I've said to the engineers, how many of your products have you seen in the OR? None. How many of the competitors' products have you seen in the OR? None.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in the OR?
Yeah.
No. Have you ever talked to a clinician?
Yeah.
No.
Have you been in a hospital?
Have you been in a hospital? Yeah.
So I credit a good client. I appreciate the compliment, but I want to say one of our best clients said, we want that. I said, okay, here's your proposal. Here's how we can do it. He said, wait, just a minute. Before you do that, he was like, gosh, okay, that's fascinating. He said, could you just go and watch a bunch of procedures? And he set up a huge tour of the United States right in the middle of a snowstorm, but anyway. And I watched like 10 or 15 procedures, quite complex procedures. And I was like, oh, what you said you wanted. Yeah, I get what you did. Okay, that's all wrong. Don't do that. Yeah. Do this. Yeah. And we did it. And it was really good project. And it was that was a credit to that was not a credit to me. That was a credit to the client who was very forward looking.
And I'm not saying that all strategics don't do it. And there are some really great engineers I've worked with in the past within some of the big companies. And they've had to fight to go out and do it.
Yeah.
And it's not just a natural process. But I think the commercial team needs to be in at the front end with some kind of commercial guidance. And I don't mean you have to hire a sales manager from day one, because that's a burn of money if you're a startup. But having a commercially savvy person come in and make sure that they've got inputs, or help your engineers to ask the right questions that need to be asked. Just as a double check. Doesn't mean the engineer doesn't know how to do it, but a nice double check, I think it's just a sensible maneuver early on in the process.
Very good. And so, Paul, how do you feel as an engineer about bringing in too many commercial people too early on?
So I always see this startling difference between startups and multinationals. And a startup is under pressure to hit their milestones, trigger the next investment. They have to raise shareholder value in order to trigger the next investment round. And that means there's milestones that are defined and agreed with the board, agreed with the lead investor, whoever. And that could be design freeze. Design freeze is a milestone we must hit. can we freeze the design now? We've frozen the design, we've hit a milestone, and it's race to freeze the design. To hell with change controls. It's just freeze the design. And in multinationals, you see this opposite tension of when I hit my milestone B3, or whatever the PDP says, I trigger all this multidisciplinary scrutiny, and I get swamped by overwhelming bureaucracy and overheads, and I must push that out. We know what to do. We know how to build the product. My God, please don't trigger that milestone. If the longer we can put it off, the better. Yeah. So it's this kind of interesting thing. You're talking about bringing in commercial scrutiny. It's just fascinating. At TTP, I think, bring the scrutiny. At the end of the day, we have a project. We have to deliver something. It has to be successful for the client. Otherwise, we don't have a sustainable business. This is not a you know, we can't just say, we've done it. You know, bring in we can't have $1 million end effector, as you said earlier. It's got to be commercial. It's got to be. I
just want to make one point of clarity to make sure that everyone understands what I mean as well. Also by commercial, I don't mean necessarily the sales rep from Chelsea. Okay, I don't necessarily mean that. You have to make sure again that you have the right commercial people with the right mentality and education come in, who understand the development process. I mean, I've seen, you know, commercial people who don't understand the process come in and see a prototype and say, "Oh, this is a disaster. This is I mean, you can't sell that." They don't understand how the process works. Or they'll go into a lab and see it work in a lab, and they'll be like, "I'll never be able to sell that." So again, you need the right commercial people in there, and often that's a strategic marketing person who's done a lot of product development in the past, but they're also very connected into the commercial market. But they've got what I call a capability of being a Rosetta Stone. I think this is a capability that all good strategic marketing people have, which is they can talk with the clinician and talk in terms of not what do you want, but what do you need. What's the problems we're addressing? They can talk to the C-suite of the hospital, understand the problems, the needs, and uncover that, and then take those back to the engineers in language they understand, because they have to be almost an interpreter between the two worlds sometimes, because the danger is that a surgeon says, "I want a longer this," and actually they don't. That's what they think they want, and that doesn't get translated correctly.
I completely agree. I have never seen a project or product or company fail because they were too careful figuring out the user need. Now, I get it, disruptive innovation, the iPhone is I get that, but establishing a clear set of user needs or commercial needs or commissioning needs, or these things are absolutely vital. My limitation as an engineer is I've been through human factors studies, and I enthusiastically start talking to doctors, and what I'd like to know from you is this, and my human factors colleagues is, "Can I handle the questioning, please? Stop asking closed questions." All that. There is a skill there, and as an engineer, I need my colleagues to help me with that. But still, that I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm saying, and it is that there's a skill in the questioning. You know, you just can't ask them, you know, "What do you want?" And that often.
You know, I went into a surgical procedure once. I watched it for hours. I watched the guy. It was a really primitive setup, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, this is that end of the spectrum." And I thought, okay, here we go. Afterwards, we went and had coffee. It was a slightly weird coffee, but anyway, it was a coffee. And I said to the guy, "Okay, we're TTP. We can do anything. What do you want? Like, you could do that was a mess. That went badly. My God, anything that you could do differently that we could do, we could enable anything." And he said, "Yeah, I'd like a bigger display." I was like, "Oh no."
That's the paradigm. And again,
so anyway, my human factors colleague took over, and there was a fruitful discussion, and it was fine.
They do a very good job, and uncovering what's the real problem they're trying to solve, and that's what we try and get to or what we should be trying to get to in the industry is solving problems, not delivering wants.
Sure. Yeah. And so, from early on when we were doing a bit of a tour, this was a topic that came up. But how much does really nice looking product design matter in the market, and how does that, I guess, frame it as, how much is that going to be a success factor in a company succeeding or failing? I'll start with you, Paul.
Oh God, start with the novice. I don't know. I think it makes a difference. I look at CMR and I think they've got a gorgeous industrial design. Just take that as an example. And for me, there's a brand value, there's an investor message, there's an employee motivation. I mean, I've got a clue, that's not my field, but it seems like it makes all sorts of difference. And if you are slipshod, I don't know, I speak English, but I don't know. It seems like if you're messy and you're a bit, if you are function-led, okay, I'm carefully not naming names. I have not named the counterexamples, but yeah, I think it paints a different picture.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, some
like the accent.
No, I think it's important. So primary is it has to work and be safe. Okay, forget how beautiful it looks. It has to be work and it has to be safe and it has to work effectively. That's a given, right? Once that's a given, I think design aesthetics are more and more important. And that's also because from the consumer world, things have changed. Look at a telephone today versus, a telephone how it was in the past. I think we've all, as society, gone further in thinking that, form and function and goes hand in hand and beautiful and aesthetics. And it also depends on the value of the product that you're selling. If you're selling a multi-million-dollar deal, okay, it can't look like something that's been made in a shed somewhere and just looks industrial and not curated. I think you say another interesting thing. Definitely from the customer point of view, they expect it to be beautiful and functional and really great. And Da Vinci 5 is a beautiful example of that. The way that they've done the tower and the integration and the touch screens and everything is really beautiful. But I also think for the company, especially in startups, the design beauty is what I would call eye candy for investors. And eye candy is powerful when you're making a pitch. If you put on there, some of the little wires hanging out and springs hanging out of it, human beings look at that and go, well, that's never going to get finished.
I'll give you another example. Besides CMR, I think CMR is my best example.
Yeah, I love
and
it.
I'm not trying to pander to you, but I think it's a gorgeous industrial design. Another one I thought I was really impressed by the investor deck. Just that is Vicarious Surgical.
Yeah.
Now we can all debate the Vicarious success and all that, but I'm taking the investor deck was bloody impressive.
Yeah. It's aesthetics. Aesthetics count. Brand counts. Design counts. Colours count. The whole aesthetics around it count. And from early on, by the way, a really decent looking prototype can go a long way to raising money for a startup.
But when we think about how people make buying decisions, it's never usually because of that function of the product. It's like how it makes you feel. How does that system or how does this brand actually make you feel? It's the same from a talent perspective as well. And we see the same. It's like good companies that have branded themselves and positioned themselves and been in your face a long time. They're the ones who everyone knows and everyone wants to work for. So the tech almost comes as a secondary, like that surface first conversation. Like when we get into it, there's a lot to be said about good design brand-wise.
So creativity, I had a colleague here who explained to me, creativity is a process. It's just a process. You can write it down. It is what it is. So an engineering decision can be boiled down to a process. But I love the idea of going through that process, learning from it, putting it to one side, and then making a decision. I love that. Anyway, sorry, we're diverging.
So I want to talk about like where the future of medical technology as a whole is going. So we've talked a lot about surgical robotics, and that's natural given all of our backgrounds. But what does medtech look like in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some of the trends? It can be technology, it can be commercial, it can be market, whatever. But what are some of the trends that you think are going to happen?
Everything's going to be smart, connected. AI is going to be in everything, even in the smallest thing that it will have either in its design or its conceptualization or its marketing and stuff. But there'll be AI touching everything the next decade. And I think some of the bigger systems that are going to be out there in healthcare will be very smart. I think that's the trend. It's going to be more tech. The plastics and the metals and all that around it are going to be, good, and there's going to be lots of advances in the components and the technology around the components and things like that. But I think anyone who doesn't have a smart device in the future is going to struggle. If it doesn't allow data and flow to come back and prove itself to the healthcare system, I think the value proposition compared to what's going to be out there will be very difficult to sell.
Where are we going to start seeing high levels of AI? What is AI going to do?
I'll give an example.
Yeah.
I'm not an AI guy, but I can see an endoscopy, for example. You think of GI Genius, it's great. It can see that thing I think was cancer. But I think that's like a step. And another step is you missed a bit. You missed a bit behind that. I didn't see, so you couldn't have seen behind that flap. Go back and have a look. Or you no longer need your narrowband imaging or your ICG because I can see enough surface structure to tell me that there's a peculiar cell type which you can't pick up with the eye. All of that is different stages, let alone the big data going around it and learning and that regulations are difficult around that at the moment, but that's evolving too. I mean, so I think AI is it's coming. As kind of everybody talks about it, I think there's some other interesting things.
Go on.
Like, for example, take orthopedics. The revenue in orthopedics is absolutely struggling right now because of insurance patterns, people referring each other to, I think the average, don't quote me, I'm just an engineer, but I heard that in America, the average time spent with an insurer right now is 1 year.
Yeah.
And they ping you to the next one, they try to fob you off with drugs. And that's saving up for surgery. Just like in the pandemic, nobody had elective procedures, it saved up surgery. So there's a lot of revenue in that sector. Similar in eye care, there's a lot of aging demographics. Pickleball, my friend's a CFO at Medicare, and he said pickleball is causing us all sorts of insurance claims. It's a nightmare. Well, I'm sorry about the nightmare. That's also revenues for my other friends who are in, Stryker and so on. So there's and that comes back to the build to buy. Revenue tomorrow, but cash shortage today lends itself to the build to buy. You can afford to, play the futures game. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
There's going to be lots of improvements in things like sensors. I think sensors is going to be more and more of a big thing. Being able to give more information that you don't get as a human being. I think that those sort of things are going to be a big change. It's always going to be how you interpret it and do it, but seeing beyond the human eye, feeling things you can't feel. We talked a little bit before about haptics, for example. I mean, we have a certain degree of haptics, but are the things that could we feel cancer rather than see cancer? I think there's going to be sensors coming that I think that's going to change a lot in the next 10 years because there's just emerging technologies all the time.
We had an interesting thing. Is it okay to go off on a side tangent?
Please do.
So it's a really interesting thing. We had some ablation technology that we were seeing as a top unmet need. I can't tell if it's done. If I overablate, I kill the patient. I'm talking about atrial fibrillation. If you weld the heart to the esophagus, then the patient dies. In atrial fibrillation, in RF ablation for atrial fibrillation, you get a 2% incidence of stroke and a 2% incidence of myocardial infarction. It's a bloody barbaric procedure. And if you don't do it enough, if you don't RF ablate far enough, then you might think you're done, but you then have to come back and do it again, and it's much harder to do this. So it's really the lesion visualization in some of these procedures difficult. You think, I'll look at it with ultrasound. And with ultrasound, with RF ablation, a lot of us have been there and burnt our fingers. It's really hard. You can sometimes see it, and sometimes you can't, and it's not good enough. You need to always be able to see it. But you're talking about feeling cancer. You can palpate this thing. You can palpate the lesion. I can feel it. It feels hard.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's gone hard.
Yeah.
So what about elastography?
Yes.
So, elastography is terribly expensive. Wait a minute. What about strain imaging? Strain imaging is elastography. Is you send a push pulse out and you watch that propagate out and the speeds. Anyway, you can see the moduluses of elasticity. But if you actually use the body's own contraction and expansion, say, for example, inside the heart, or just take the surgeon, go back to laparoscopic again, we built something that was so sensitive that just the tremor of your hand was enough to cause a little bit of distortion and elastic deformation. We can see the bits that are stiff because they're not moving. The strain is really low, and the bits that are flexible, the strain is really high. So strain imaging, as we call that, or passive elastography. It's cheap. It's the cost of an ultrasound probe. And that's really cool. You can see your lesion then. You can tick off your unmet need. Your commercial team's happy.
They're very happy then. They're very happy. And again, you've got to give things that add value. Okay. And ultimately for me, and this is what I've been thinking about just a lot recently, is the biggest we can move the healthcare dial is also just remove errors. So as you say, if you're talking about ablation, I do want to talk about another thing on ablation in a minute, but if you're talking about ablation and you can just reduce that 2% stroke and you can make it 1%, just do that. That moves the dial in healthcare so much more than a lot of other things that come out. I do want to talk about one final thing that I think is an interesting area, and it's things like endogenics.
Yeah.
So if you look at
on.
looking at how you're doing pulse field ablations and different energy modalities to do metabolics. Metabolic changes at the cellular level.
Yeah.
Anastomosis.
This slow anastomotic cascade starts in the procedure. Is it snake oil? It's working. The clinical results are damn good.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
So,
another one is because I thought you were going to also talk about combinations of surgery. In fact, frankly, the landscape of surgery is going to change
dramatically.
If Novo's GLP takes off and they don't have so many dropouts, then the bariatric market starts to shrink. It's still huge. It's still underserved. We all need to do more for bariatric patients surgically or endosurgically. Anyway, but if you have good biologics for cancer, so checkpoint inhibitors, immune checkpoint inhibitors,
it's all coming.
It's coming.
Yeah.
What if you do both? If you can inject a good immune inhibitor, a checkpoint inhibitor in a cancer at the same time as removing it. There have been a couple of mouse studies recently. Have you seen those? Yeah. So they put cancer into a mouse. You treat the cancer. You have a checkpoint inhibitor in the mouse, and then you try to put the cancer back in, and it won't take.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
So this again is going to be augmented through things like robotics, because your precision of where you've got a small lesion in the liver. You use something like histosonics.
Yeah.
Great.
Terrific
thing. You do histotripsy of the tumor, and then you go in with a robot that's using the same guidance system, and you inject in and you put these inhibitors straight into where the void is of that. This sort of combination therapy, I think it's starting to come out of the lab, and I think we're going to see that more and more coming soon. mRNA.
General biological understanding of these is cracking up. It's not me, I'm a mechanical engineer, but I hear my biologist friends telling me about natural expression of some of these things during a histotripsy procedure. Like, goddamn. So that explains why it's not metastatic.
Yes.
It's like, okay, I'm glad to hear there's something.
And we'll boost it with these kind of things. There's going to be a lot of mRNA vaccine technologies that are going to come as well, that are also going to be injected locally. Precision medicine, tailored medicine, we could go on for the next 2 or 3 hours. There's just a lot of stuff coming where there's convergences of technologies coming from all angles that is going to change the landscape of surgery.
Interesting, incredibly interesting topics from both of you. So the kind of final thing is, like, what's one lesson you'd give to startup founders or leaders that you see consistently people are making?
My number one plea to all startup founders is kill your idea that's not going to work as fast and as early as possible before you commit time and money to it.
Okay. And how do people identify the point to turn off the taps?
If in doubt, throw it out. If you are really struggling, and actually Billy Cohen the other day, we talked about this a little bit, and he was saying, but sometimes you've got to pivot and stuff like that. And I think he's right on that. But pivot fast then. Whatever you do, if the idea that you think is struggling, you're not going to fix it in the long term, and you're not going to raise the money to fix it. So either pivot dramatically at that point, or kill that idea and find another idea, because you're going to spend a decade on this and you're going to spend hundreds of millions on it. And if you're going to do that, do it on something that's actually got a chance of surviving. So that's my number one advice.
I like that.
Paul?
Me? Well, I don't advise startups, but so I like that. Pivot and be brave about it. Don't be too precious about the thing that you thought was amazing. Don't overvalue your thing. Manage expectations. Don't go by hook or by crook to get the investor to, just like I said, what it took to, just don't. You're going to just delay pain. That probably goes for that's not startups, that's anywhere.
Anyway.
But I don't know. I'm not an advisor to startups like Steve is. I trust Steve.
I wouldn't trust me.
So is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with that we haven't spoken about today, Paul?
Do you know, there is something. I was going to say there was something, going back to what we were talking about on Build to Buy. I'd say you look carefully at partner selection. You look carefully at investor selection. It's not just, somebody was willing to give me money. What if you had an investor that added a lot of value? And I have a close friend who's a good investor, and we work together. And I would say he's not let me name him because he likes to stay private, and I really respect that. But I'd love to make more introductions. I'd love to make more business opportunities for people, your audience, on the back of that person, because he's not only able to make deals happen quickly and professionally, he's got tremendous background in medtech, and he's got tremendous value add. And he comes from this, his origins, like Steve, are on the sales side of medtech, and it just makes him deal oriented. It makes him proactive and people oriented. I think I'd love to put people in touch, and I'd love to have that conversation with your audience.
Sure, and we'll put a link in the comments for that so people can reach out to you or TTP about that. So that's
Great.
all good. What about you, Steve? What would you like to leave the audience with?
I don't think there's been a more exciting time in medtech than there is now. I think there's just so many cool things around at the minute, and I think it's a great time. And I would especially encourage the investment community to keep investing in this space, because there's so much coming and there's so much opportunity that yeah, it's exciting.
Awesome. Thank you both of you. That was a really good conversation. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Crux of Medtech podcast. If you're not already doing so, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube or follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Crux. Crux is a medtech search firm which places pioneers in transformative roles to help us live longer, healthier lives. We do 3 things for companies. We help hire world-class executive talent. We help companies raise investment from Series A to Series C and execute upon M&A. And we also are building a community of medtech leaders to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and accelerate the companies to help them go faster. If you're interested in any of those 3 things, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. Thank you.